all, didn't Trump say that the children only need $2 and that the $2 might cost more? With economic policies like these, Donald Trump is the Grinch who stole Christmas. But Democrats aren't the only ones raising alarms. Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until recently was a die-hard Trump supporter, acknowledged that under the Trump administration, the cost of living has become unbearably high. Corporate interests are prioritized over the needs of the working class. Small businesses are hurting, and the American dream is slipping out of reach. We were all promised lower costs on day one of Trump's term. Instead, his administration is dismantling the very institutions that keep costs low and the economy stable, including by undermining the...
You just heard Maxine Waters declare what millions of Americans are feeling this holiday season, but Trump refuses to acknowledge, and we need to talk about this moment, because it represents something far larger than one fiery congresswoman calling out the president's catastrophic economic incompetence, because what Waters articulated in that House Financial Services Committee hearing crystallizes the devastating reality that 57% of voters recognize Trump is losing the battle against inflation, while prices rose 3% in the 12 months ending in September, with consumers spending less on big-ticket items, and the president has the audacity to stand before the American people and call their lived experience of economic suffering a hoax. This is not hyperbole, and this is not partisan exaggeration, because Trump told the crowd in Mount Pocono that he believed the term affordability was a hoax perpetrated by Democrats, and if that doesn't send chills down your spine as someone who understands the history of authoritarian gaslighting, then you haven't been paying attention to the playbook that's been written across continents and centuries, where those in power deny the material conditions of the masses in order to maintain their stranglehold on wealth and influence. Waters called Trump the Grinch who stole Christmas, and she's absolutely right, because during the Thanksgiving break, constituents reported that buying groceries for Thanksgiving dinner was much more expensive this year, while Trump's weakening economy is squeezing families so much that many are concerned they will need to pull back on holiday spending, and this is happening right now in real time, as families across America are making impossible choices between heating their homes and feeding their children, between paying for medication and paying rent. But here's where this gets absolutely explosive, and you need to understand the full scope of what's unfolding, because even Marjorie Taylor Greene, who until recently was practically Trump's most devoted acolyte in Congress, has broken ranks over this exact issue. Greene told CBS News that she doesn't believe affordability is a hoax, adding that everyone's bills have either stayed the same or gone up, and you can't gaslight people and tell them that their bills are affordable. Which means that Trump's denial of economic reality has become so extreme, so divorced from what working Americans are experiencing, that even his most hardcore MAGA supporters can no longer maintain the fiction. Greene has criticized the effects Trump's tariffs and mass deportation efforts are having on U.S. businesses, and this represents a fracture in the Republican coalition that should terrify anyone who understands that when authoritarian movements begin eating their own, when true believers start questioning the dear leader's grip on reality, that's often a sign that the contradictions of the system are becoming impossible to paper over with propaganda and spectacle. The fact that Greene said many of her colleagues went from making fun of Trump and making fun of how he talks to kissing his ass and putting on a MAGA hat for the first time when he won the primary in 2024 reveals the performative nature of Republican loyalty, but also the terror that members feel about crossing Trump because they're terrified to step out of line and get a nasty Truth Social post, which is how autocracy functions, through fear and through the constant threat of being cast out of the movement. Let's be crystal clear about what Waters is calling out here, because Trump's tariffs have inflated prices, forced layoffs, shuttered businesses, and disproportionately hurt black workers and entrepreneurs, and tariffs are raising about $30 billion per month in revenue, but have increased prices on items from food to clothing to furniture, which means that working families are subsidizing Trump's economic nationalism experiment with their own diminished purchasing power, with their own inability to afford basic necessities. The University of Michigan economist Betsy Stevenson put it perfectly when she noted that Trump is pursuing policies that are purposefully restricting supply, which every person who has taken even an introductory economics course knows will push up prices. And yet Trump stands there brazenly lying to the American people, telling them that what they're experiencing isn't real, that their grocery bills haven't increased, that their children aren't going without, that the American dream isn't slipping through their fingers like sand. This is propaganda in its purest, most insidious form, because it's not just about spinning the facts, it's about denying material reality itself. It's about telling people that their own eyes and their own bank accounts are lying to them, and that only Trump can be trusted to interpret their lived experience. And here's what should absolutely infuriate you, because inflation dipped to a low this year of 2.3% in April, but has steadily ticked up since then, and now stands at the same rate as in January, when Trump was inaugurated, which means all of Trump's promises about crushing inflation on day one, about making America affordable again, were complete fabrications. Economists attribute the rise partly to Trump's tariffs, with Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell pointing to those levies as a key factor behind the recent uptick. So Trump's own policies are directly responsible for the pain Americans are feeling, yet he has the audacity to blame Biden to call affordability concerns a con job orchestrated by Democrats. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said it's been largely caused by tariffs, and when even Powell, who Trump has relentlessly attacked and undermined, admits that tariffs are driving inflation, you know the evidence is overwhelming and irrefutable, but Trump doesn't care about evidence because authoritarians never do. They care about narrative control, they care about maintaining the fiction of their own infallibility, even as the world burns around them. Waters is speaking truth to power when she points out that the cost of living has become unbearably high. Corporate interests are prioritized over the needs of the working class, small businesses are hurting, and the American dream is slipping out of reach. And this isn't just rhetoric. This is the lived reality of millions of Americans who are drowning in debt, who are more likely to skip meals and medication, fall behind on bills, carry debt, and work in unstable hourly jobs with low pay. According to recent surveys, the Century Foundation survey found that younger Americans, people of color, and women are disproportionately suffering and increasingly forced to make difficult trade-offs, from skipping medical care and meals to relying on payday loans and cash advances, which reveals the deeply racialized and gendered nature of this economic violence, because of course the most vulnerable populations are bearing the brunt of Trump's disastrous policies, while billionaires are literally making money hand over fist. Trump and his family have received nearly $2 billion in cash gifts and crypto profits, while regulators work on crypto rules that could legitimize this corruption, which Waters rightly identifies as the Trump family putting money into their own pockets, while Americans struggle, and this is kleptocracy. In broad daylight, this is the marriage of state power and personal enrichment that we associate with the most corrupt regimes on earth. The data is absolutely damning, and you need to sit with these numbers because Americans now estimate they will spend an average of $778 on Christmas gifts, down $229 from October's 1,007, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November estimate of 1,001, and significantly below last year's November. This year's mid-season decline is the largest Gallup has recorded, surpassing the $125 drop seen during the 2008 global financial crisis. Let that sink in for a moment, because what we're witnessing right now in terms of consumer sentiment and spending pullback is worse than what American experienced during the Great Recession, and yet Trump is out here giving himself an A++ grade, telling us that the economy has never been better, that we're bringing in trillions of dollars. Holiday consumer confidence is at historic lows, with 57% predicting the economy will weaken in the next 6 months, which is the highest figure since 1997. And this isn't just people being pessimistic, this is people responding to concrete material conditions, like Americans spending on average over $11,000 more to maintain the same standard of living as at the start of 2021, according to Senate reports. What Waters understands, and what progressive economists have been screaming from the rooftops, is that Trump's entire economic model is designed to transfer wealth upward, to concentrate resources in the hands of the already wealthy, while working Americans suffer, and this is not an accident, it's the point. The administration's policies may be exacerbating the so-called K-shaped economy, in which wealthier Americans benefit from their growing investments in the stock market, while lower-income Americans increasingly live paycheck to paycheck. Bank of America deposit data shows higher-income households' paychecks grew 4% year-over-year in November, well above the 3% inflation rate, but middle-income households' paychecks gained just 2.3%, and lower-income households' wages were up only 1.4%, half the pace of inflation, which means that the bottom half of America is actually losing ground every single month, while the wealthy get wealthier. This is class warfare, and it's being waged with deliberate precision through policy choices that Trump and his administration are making every single day. The unemployment picture is equally terrifying, because 1.1 million layoffs had been announced by U.S. employers by the end of October. Mass layoff warnings filed with the government are at their highest level in a decade, with 2025 being called the year of layoffs as corporations use rapidly developing automation and AI technology to eliminate vast swaths of the workforce, imposing the cost of the developing economic crisis on the backs of workers. 3 out of 10 business leaders say their companies are planning layoffs during the holiday season, which is particularly cruel because this practice had fallen out of fashion in recent years due to negative publicity, but the pace of job cuts is so severe that corporations can't even afford to pause for a few weeks during Christmas. And get this, because it reveals the scope of how bad things are getting. Stores are expected to hire between 265,000 and 365,000 seasonal workers in 2025, down sharply from the 442,000 they hired last year, which is a drop of as much as 40% in holiday hiring, which is a massive warning sign for the broader labor market. Trump's response to all of this documented suffering, all of this empirical evidence of an affordability crisis, is to deny that it exists. He has falsely claimed there is no inflation, and called the broader issue of affordability the greatest con job and a Democratic hoax. Even when he has acknowledged prices remain high, he has blamed Biden, which is gaslighting on an industrial scale. But here's what particularly insidious, and this is where Waters' Grinch comparison becomes so apt, because adding to the tone-deaf messaging has been Trump's focus on multi-million-dollar White House renovations and a ballroom, a cabinet featuring multiple billionaires, and the president's regular weekend trips to his ritzy Mar-a-Lago club. While Americans are skipping meals and rationing medication, the suckle-pinure-coyan optics of this are absolutely grotesque because it reveals that Trump and his administration are so disconnected from the lived reality of working Americans that they genuinely don't understand why people are upset. They think it's all a perception problem that can be solved with better messaging, rather than an actual material crisis that requires policy solutions. Waters is right to call out the institutional destruction, because Trump is dismantling the very institutions that keep costs low and the economy stable, including by undermining the independence of the Federal Reserve, and this is crucial, because an independent central bank is one of the key institutional safeguards against political manipulation of monetary policy. Trump's pressure campaign on Powell to lower interest rates has undermined the crucial independence of the Federal Reserve, and Trump has made it clear that the next chair of the Fed will be someone whom he expects to be more pliant. And when he didn't like the data reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, he fired its head, undermining the credibility of an institution that provides fundamental input for sound economic policy, which should terrify anyone who understands that autocrats always attack independent institutions, because those institutions have the power to speak truth about economic conditions that contradict the regime's propaganda. History shows us that political control over any central bank results in higher inflation than would otherwise be the case, which means Trump's assault on Fed independence will actually make the inflation problem worse, not better, but he doesn't care because maintaining his grip on narrative control is more important than actual economic outcomes. The clip mentions something absolutely explosive that we need to dig into, because even if it's somewhat garbled in the transcript, the substance is there about Trump suggesting children only need $2 and concerns about costs, and this connects to the broader pattern of Trump's complete disconnect from what things actually cost for normal Americans. This is a man who's never had to worry about money a day in his life, who's never had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries, who's never had to explain to his children why they can't have new shoes this year, yet he stands before the American people and tells them that their economic anxiety is manufactured by Democrats. As Democrats campaigning on affordability, pickup wins Trump's messaging about a strong economy is at odds with widespread voter sentiment that he's not doing enough to tackle rising costs, which is showing up in election results because November's odd-year races saw Democrats who campaigned on affordability win major contests in New York City, Virginia, and New Jersey, and this is sending shockwaves through Republican leadership because they understand that if the 2026 midterms become a referendum on affordability, they're going to get absolutely demolished. The contradiction at the heart of Trump's economic messaging is that of focusing on the cost of living or affordability, which Trump has repeatedly labeled a hoax, the president prefers to tout the revenue the U.S. Treasury is collecting from tariffs and business investment, but the Trump administration brought in around $200 billion in new tariff revenue this year, which in a $30 trillion economy is a drop in the bucket and isn't enough to support $2,000 stimulus checks for every American household or eliminate income taxes, and certainly isn't enough to pay down the $38 trillion debt. Trump is speaking like a business executive focused on revenue growth, but the economy is not a business, the economy is people, and many of them are hurting, and this fundamental misunderstanding of what economic policy should prioritize reveals that Trump sees Americans as inputs in a profit maximization equation, rather than as human beings with dignity and needs and rights to economic security. Waters is channeling the rage that millions of Americans feel when they look at their bank accounts, when they go to the grocery store, when they try to afford Christmas presents for their children. And this rage is justified because 1 in 7 Americans in 2023 were food insecure, with the rate 1.5 times higher for children, and the situation has only worsened due to the cutoff of food stamps on which 42 million people rely, combined with $180 billion in additional cuts over the next decade. The cruelty is the point here, because these aren't accidental outcomes. These are deliberate policy choices being made by an administration that fundamentally believes that poor people deserve to suffer, that government assistance creates dependency, that the market will sort everything out even as we watch in real time, as the market is destroying millions of lives, and the fact that the government's response is simply to cover it up with the U.S. Department of Agriculture announcing it would no longer issue its annual food insecurity report, calling it subjective liberal fodder that does nothing but fearmonger, and the White House refusing to release the full October unemployment report, is straight out of the authoritarian playbook, because if you can't solve the problem, you hide the data, you attack the institutions that measure the problem, you tell people that their suffering isn't real. The global economic order is being fundamentally reshaped by Trump's policies, and not in ways that benefit working Americans, because the policies of the new administration are likely to weigh negatively on both the U.S. and global economy in the short and long term, according to analysis by over 50 experts, and the direction of travel is unmistakable towards a world with higher trade barriers, weaker institutions, and more fragile growth. What Waters understands is that Trump's trade war, his tariffs, his assault on multilateral institutions, his destruction of the post-war international order, these aren't making America great again. They're isolating us, they're impoverishing us, they're transferring costs onto working families, while the wealthy elite profit from chaos and instability. The evidence depicts a global system that is becoming more inward-looking and more vulnerable to shocks emanating from Washington, with the U.S. once the principal architect and guarantor of the rules-based international system, now actively challenging the institutions and norms it created. And this represents a historic betrayal of American leadership that will have consequences for generations. When Waters talks about Trump prioritizing corporate interests over working-class needs, she's describing a systematic looting of the public sphere for private gain. Trump was elected in part on the promise of helping people lower down the income scale, but under his second administration, income and wealth gaps have only widened, with healthcare premiums for lower-income people who buy insurance through exchanges rising dramatically. While the supplementary food aid program was cut sharply during the recent government shutdown, the cost of electricity is up sharply, house prices remain high, and shelter is increasingly unaffordable, with Trump's policies on trade, immigration, taxes, and AI not lowering these costs. This is a deliberate reconstruction of American society along more starkly hierarchical lines, where the wealthy live in one reality with access to everything they need, and the working class struggles to survive in an increasingly precarious economy where one medical emergency or car repair or job loss can push you into destitution. The Grinch metaphor works because Trump is literally stealing Christmas from American families. He's taking away their ability to provide for their children, to celebrate, to experience joy and connection and community, because they're so consumed with anxiety about basic survival. A majority of people are reporting severe economic distress during the holidays, with spending being financed through debt, with buy now, pay later purchases increasing by 9%, and 1 in 3 expecting to slip into debt, with many putting expenses on credit cards, pulling from savings, or using buy now, pay later plans, which means that the holiday spending that does occur is digging families deeper into debt, creating financial problems that will haunt them for months and years to come. And the most obscene part is that spending is driven almost entirely by high-income purchasers, with slight rises in overall spending accounted for by tariff-driven price increases, and the domination of consumer spending by a narrow, privileged minority. So the economic data that Trump points to as evidence of success is actually evidence of deepening inequality. Waters' attack on Trump is not just about one man's failures, it's about a systemic crisis of capitalism in its late stage, where accumulation of wealth at one pole is at the same time accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, and mental degradation at the opposite pole, on the side of the class that produces its own product, in the form of capital, As Marx explained, and we're watching this dialectic play out in real time, as billionaires accumulate unprecedented wealth, while working Americans can't afford to see a doctor or feed their children. The deployment of AI and automation is primarily being used for automation, meaning fewer jobs with data centers highly automated and likely to only employ 100 people per center, while the power demands from data centers are pushing up electricity costs across the country, which means that technological advancement under capitalism becomes a weapon against workers rather than a tool for liberation and shared prosperity. The fact that even Jerome Powell, who Trump has attacked mercilessly, is now making arguments similar to Trump's about affordability, saying we need years where real compensation is higher for people to start feeling good about the affordability issue, and that the Fed is trying to keep inflation under control, but also support the labor market and strong wages, so people are earning enough money and feeling economically healthy again, should tell you how serious the crisis has become, because Powell is essentially admitting that years of economic pain are ahead before most Americans will feel any relief. And the political implications are explosive, because it's clear that the Trump administration is feeling pressure to address concerns about cost of living following November's elections, which saw voters push back against the president's agenda, with the administration making shifts, including rolling back tariffs on some food imports in an attempt to lower grocery prices, and floating the idea of a 50-year mortgage, but these are band-aids on a hemorrhage. These are desperate attempts to manage perception rather than address root causes. Waters is calling out something that every progressive understands, which is that Trump's economic model is fundamentally designed to serve capital, not labor, to enrich the already wealthy, not lift up working families. Voters, like all voters, want policymakers to address the cost of living crisis, curb corporate abuse, and put more money in the hands of working families, and with even greater price hikes on the horizon in 2026, leaders in both parties should listen to what voters are telling them and act decisively to make life in America more affordable and fair. This is the political opening for a genuinely transformative progressive agenda, because people are ready for solutions. They're ready for someone to actually fight for them, rather than gaslight them. They're ready for policies that redistribute wealth downward, that strengthen labor power, that put human needs before corporate profits. The question is whether the Democratic Party will seize this moment, or whether they'll continue to triangulate and means test and compromise with forces that are actively immiserating the working class. What we're witnessing is not just bad economic policy, it's a moral crisis. It's a crisis of values. It's a crisis that reveals who we are as a society. When we allow children to go hungry while billionaires accumulate wealth beyond human comprehension, when we tell people that their suffering is imaginary, while data shows unprecedented economic distress, when we dismantle the institutions meant to protect workers and consumers, and the vulnerable, in order to give more power to corporations and the already powerful, Waters is right to call Trump the Grinch, because he is stealing Christmas, he is stealing hope. He is stealing the American dream itself, and replacing it with a nightmare of precarity and anxiety and desperation, while telling people that everything is fine, that the economy has never been better, that anyone who disagrees is spreading fake news. The fight ahead is not just about winning elections. It's about fundamentally restructuring our economy along more equitable lines. It's about building worker power. It's about taxing the rich. It's about universal programs that guarantee healthcare and housing and education as rights, not commodity. It's about reasserting democratic control over economic decision-making, rather than leaving everything to markets that consistently produce inequality and suffering. Waters is speaking for millions when she says enough is enough, when she calls out the corruption, when she names the Grinch for what he is. And we need to listen to that voice. We need to amplify that rage. We need to channel it into organized political power that can actually transform material conditions, because people are hurting right now. Today they can't wait for incremental reform. They can't wait for market solutions, need bold transformative action, and they need it immediately. This moment, with Waters branding Trump the Grinch, should be a clarion call for everyone who believes in economic justice, everyone who understands that a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members, everyone who recognizes that we have the resources to ensure every single person in America has a dignified life, but we lack the political will because those resources are being hoarded by a tiny elite who have captured our political system. The contradiction is unsustainable, the suffering is unnecessary, solutions exist, and the question is whether we have the courage to fight for them, whether we have the solidarity to build a movement powerful enough to overcome entrenched interests, whether we can create the political conditions necessary for genuine transformation, because the alternative is watching as more families slide into poverty, as more children go to bed hungry, as more people lose hope, as Christmas becomes not a celebration, but a reminder of everything they can't afford, everything they're denied, everything they deserve, but will never have under this brutal system that valued profit over people.